We're
Hi.
live.
Great.
Welcome.
Hi.
It's a pleasure to chat with you.
Thanks. It's great to be on your channel.
Yeah. So Noel is the author of this compelling new book, "Looking for a Story," published by Princeton University Press, and its pub date is coming up next week, I believe.
Next May 13th,
Yeah. And
next
Noel
Thursday.
Noel and I were colleagues at Newsday, where he was a reporter and senior editor. And I'm fascinated by the topic of his book. He took on probably America's foremost nonfiction writer of the late 20th century and early 21st century, John McPhee. And Noel, you want to talk a little bit about who John is and why he matters?
So John is really somebody who has quietly revolutionized the field of nonfiction writing. He's adopted so many different ideas and done so many different things in his career that's now stretched for more than 70 years. He's been a staff writer for The New Yorker for more than 60 years. He's published more than 35 books, hundreds of magazine articles for The New Yorker, previously for Time magazine. But the way he's done it has really been incredible. Just his use of structure, his use of a lot of different forms that were formerly thought of as just purely novelistic.
Yeah, he seems to have an insatiable curiosity and a really refined focus on craftsmanship in terms of the writing.
He does. He's just taken on so many different subjects, from sports to the environment to the wilderness to nuclear physics. He's just has gone from subject to subject really gracefully and always based on fact.
Yeah, and you want to talk a little bit about the structure of your own book?
So my goal was to try to make his work more accessible, even to people who've read his work for years. He's done so much that it's hard to keep track of. He's done so many books, so many articles, so many other things that people can't have read it all because they can't find it all. So my goal was to find it all and to get it out in front of the public and give people and really explore his process and give people a chance to learn more about his work and hopefully encourage them to read even more and to encourage new people who haven't read his work to read it on into the future.
One of the things that jumped out at me when I was looking at the book was your detective work in unearthing so many John McPhee articles that nobody had any idea were written by John McPhee. You want to explain how you happened to do that?
Yes, I mean, I was intrigued from the beginning that he had been a Time magazine reporter for 8 years, very early in his career when he was in his late 20s. And Time magazine at that point didn't have any bylines. It was Henry Luce had this, who was the owner and founder of Time, had this idea of group journalism, and he thought that everybody should be anonymous. But everyone wasn't anonymous. They had writers who did all these stories. And so I became really almost obsessed with trying to figure out, well, what did John McPhee write? So I found the archives of Time magazine, which are now held by the New York Historical, which is formerly the New York Historical Society in Manhattan. And I went there, and at first I couldn't find anything. But then I found the key tool, which was there's a set of bound volumes of all Time magazines where copy editors, after every issue was put to bed, had written with red grease pencils or pen the initials of the writer of every story. So it's possible, in effect, to decode all these volumes and all these stories. So I literally went through thousands of pages of Time magazine in the time that John McPhee worked there from 1959 to 1965 and found more than 500 stories that he wrote. And it was just incredible to read what he wrote as a young writer. And I brought highlights of that into the book. And it's really, I think, it's a chance for people for the first time to really see what he was doing there. The New Yorker, almost all his work has been signed. But Time magazine, none of it was signed.
You have a couple of examples of some of the great prose uh,
Yes.
of John McPhee at Time Magazine. Of course, it was, as you say, not published under his byline, but now the story can be told that he actually wrote those. And I just wonder if you might want to give a couple of examples of what he wrote.
Great. Yeah, I'll read a couple of examples. One is a story that he wrote about singer Ella Fitzgerald in 1964. And this is an excerpt from what he wrote. Her incredible improvising runs are effortless. She can take off from a melody, go over it, around it, through it, under it, moving at twice the speed of 9 to 5 man, tossing in casual doodles in the abstract expressionism of sound. When other singers' jugulars will be bulging, Ella isn't even panting. She seems to breathe through her ears. Her range goes from lower owl to upper sparrow. So I think that excerpt gets at so much of John McPhee's genius. Just the wordplay, the sound of the words, uh, the images, the ideas that he came across. He just gets at so much. I'm just going to read one other thing, which is really short, which I think gets kind of at the again how it gets to the point and the humor of him. He wrote this about actor Anthony Quinn in 1962. He has a face like a bloodhound that has just eaten an escaped convict. Now, how many people would come up with that image about what someone's face looks like? He's such an expressive writer, and he's always looking for ways that words matter. And one of the things I think that makes him great is his lifelong habit of reading his work aloud, preferably to somebody else, but I suspect he's read it to himself as well. And it just, the sound of words matters to a writer, but a lot of people don't read it out loud. I've long had that habit, but not as much as him. John McPhee once read the entirety of a book, 60,000 words, over the phone to his editor over time. And it made that book a much greater book because the not only could the editor react to the ideas of it, but could react to the sound of it. So I think his work from Time Magazine is definitely, it's unknown, and I think it's going to be greatly appreciated. He did 9 incredible cover stories, including celebrities like Barbara Streisand and Richard Burton. Wrote about the New York World's Fair. So I think there's so much to still learn about John McPhee, even if you think that you know his work.
Great. And of course, he made the decision. I guess he must have been a star writer at Time, and they must have wanted to keep him. But he made the decision to leave and eventually join the New Yorker. And just curious, why did he make that move?
Well, he actually made that decision when he was in elementary school. He wanted to work for the New Yorker from when he was in grade school. And I think 2 experiences had a big impact. One was a close friend of his in elementary school literally started giving him his parents' copies of the New Yorker. And John McPhee loved it. The other was in 1942, and I'm sorry, 1941, John McPhee actually was written about in the New Yorker. He was the son of the physician for the Princeton University football team and would always go out on the field with them. And a writer for the New Yorker who covered college football came to do a story about Princeton and wrote about McPhee. And I'm sure that helped endear him to that. So ever since he was about 10 years old, McPhee wanted to work for the New Yorker and plastered his walls with rejections. Even when he was working for Time Magazine, he was trying to get work for the New Yorker and was being rejected. Eventually, he got his big break in 1965 when he did a profile of Bill Bradley, which eventually became his first book, A Sense of Where You Are. And William Shawn, the legendary editor of the New Yorker, offered him a job as a staff writer there, and he left. And he told the editor of Time Magazine at the time, I wanted to do things that I couldn't do within the framework of Time Magazine. That's why I'm going to the New Yorker.
Yeah, just to cite one example of that, his famous book on oranges. I was leafing through it last night, and the origin of his fascination with oranges was his time as a commuter who would go to the old Penn Station, and he stopped at an orange juice machine every morning. From late autumn and on through winter and spring, I noticed a gradual deepening of the color of the juice. December was pale cadmium, April marigold, and June a Persian orange. And of course, the juice changes color because different varieties of oranges are used throughout the year. He goes on to the New Yorker and he talks to the famous editor William Shawn, and he pitches the story by saying oranges question mark, and Shawn says yes, and then it starts as a magazine article of a few hundred words, but spools out as he learns more into a book.
Yeah, I think it's just a great example of McPhee's imagination. I mean, how many people would take an idea just from common everyday life and turn it into a treatise that's fascinating? You know, and he spent a lot of time in Florida visiting orange groves and, you know, went into the details about oranges that nobody ever imagined.
How do you think history is going to remember John McPhee, and what he's kind of part of a flowering of literary nonfiction that happened in the 20th century, but
Yeah,
where does he fit in, and why did it happen?
I think he'll be remembered kind of as an unglitzy one, but a revolutionary nonetheless. I mean, you think of writers like Tom Wolfe or Joan Didion, who were very celebrated. They were kind of in cafe society, and McPhee was never that. He was never like a, you know, somebody who was very public. Here's a man who never even has allowed his photograph to be run as a on the with his book. It's a jacket photo. He's very private, and he really wants the work to speak for itself. But he is done so much that he, in effect, has spawned a whole generation of writers, of people who want to be like John McPhee. You know, many of whom were his students at Princeton, where he's taught for 50 years. And he had students who've gone on to write hundreds and hundreds of books, you know, all expressing gratitude to him. But people around the world have read his work and wanted to be like him. And so I think he's really a seminal force, but in a very different way than from some of the other nonfiction writers of his generation.
What you mentioned his teaching at Princeton. What did he? What kinds of things did he focus on and work with his students on?
It was a invitation only seminar. He took applications. For 16 spots, he sometimes got as many as 100 applications, and he would choose it down. And it was a semester where people did a series of writing assignments for him. But a big part of the work was meeting with him every other week for half an hour to talk about their work. And he critiqued their work. And he really became a lifelong mentor to a lot of these people who are still in touch with him, you know, to this day. So it was really kind of a classical writing education, but very much about, you know, for example, the first assignment was always having the students pair up, and I would do a profile of you and you would do a profile of me. So we'd interview each other. And that formed, you know, a lot of skills, has formed a lot of lifelong friendships among students who went on to become writers. I mean, in one class of his students, this is hard to believe, were two managing editors of Time magazine, Jim Kelly and Rick Stengel. So there were just so many people who've come out of his class. David Remnick is one of the people who's the most prominent, who's a longtime editor of the New Yorker now, and who was McPhee's editor, was a student of McPhee's. So he's had a huge impact through Princeton, but he's also traveled the country and done readings, met with students, and really was kind of anointed the head of a movement that was loosely called creative nonfiction.
And people want to get a flavor of his teaching. He wrote a book about his sort of philosophy of writing.
Yes, Draft Number 4 is a wonderful book where he kind of distilled all his writing advice, pulled it from different places. Most of it had appeared in the New Yorker before. Some of it was, you know, rejiggered. And it's just a brilliant and very, very funny at times guide. I mean, for example, in one section about structure, which was always a big issue for him, he has all these intricate diagrams of what the structures of stories were for him. And it, you know, it looks like you're, you know, he just makes writing a subject of great fascination. And I think he's very down to earth in his advice.
He has no use for the people who say that every story has to have a nut graph.
No, no, you know, he thinks that that's formulaic, and he's really against formula. Really, all his books have taken on different structures. He's never gone comfortable. While you can think that there's a John McPhee tone, there's not a John McPhee structure, because he's constantly changing and inventing new ways to tell stories.
You want to talk about the picnic table?
The picnic table, right? Which is a great one. So I'm gonna read something again. It's a combination of reading from my book and also from him. He was having trouble figuring out how to do his structure for a book in 1968 called The Pine Barrens, which led ultimately to the preservation of a lot of the the Pine Barrens, a huge wilderness area in New Jersey, believe it or not. And he couldn't get it right, and so he had all his notes in front of him, and he eventually went outside, and he literally lay on his picnic table every working day for 2 weeks, trying to figure it out, looking at his notes and thinking about it. And finally, he thought back to what his high school English teacher, Olive McKee at Princeton High School, had taught him about structure and trying to figure things out. And he realized that there was a man at the center of this story who was going to help him tell the story. And when he figured that out, as he put it, he got up off the picnic table and wrote the book. So,
It's a great example, and a lot of people have cited it in various contexts. And it sort of raises one question about, and you mentioned a New Republic article in your book. Can anyone afford to write like John McPhee now? Uh, did he benefit from kind of a moment in time, sort of bubble when America was so strong and prosperous, and there were jobs like being a staff writer for the New Yorker, where you could produce you know pieces of great length very occasionally. Um, can you be John McPhee right now?
well, I think John McPhee would say that he couldn't afford to be John McPhee for a long time. I think that people, really exaggerate what they think was given to him. So here's somebody who has written all these books, and he really didn't reach commercial success until his 13th book, which was Coming into the Country, which was, quite a bit into his career. Being a staff writer of the New Yorker, as I think any staff writer will tell you, is not a guaranteed salary. You're paid by the piece, and you're paid by your productivity and what you produce. So I think that John McPhee created his career, and I'm sure that money was an issue for him, like it is for all writers. And I think it doesn't really work to kind of look back on it and say, well, he was just given it out of privilege. It wasn't like he was hired for $100,000 a year. He had to really fight for his work and and create it. And he's been very lucky in terms of the stability he's had working for the New Yorker for all these years. Every book of his except one has been published by Farrar, Straus and Giroux. For many years, McPhee has worked without an agent, which is unheard of by a lot of people, and he's negotiated for himself. But he's really earned it, and I think that article, I understood the idea of it, but I think that there are not a lot of John McPhees out there. So I think that he earned being John McPhee and what he's earned.
Very interesting. Um, Noel, how did you first broach the idea of this book to John McPhee, and what has it been like working with him?
So I went to him about almost 4 years now, uh, through an intermediary who kind of passed along my pitch, and he wrote back to me, and he was immediately receptive to cooperating. And I told him what my aims were and who I was. And he's been very generous with his cooperation all along, because I think, again, he wants to have his work out there. He wants people to be able to reach it. And I've met with him, nearly a dozen times at his home or his academic office. And really, without his cooperation, the book wouldn't be anywhere near what it is, because his memory is incredible. He's 94 years old, going strong, but his memory of his work is just incredible. So he's helped me, he's put down breadcrumbs to a lot of stories that, had been forgotten or undiscovered.
Great. And he's still working on a book, right?
He's still working. He published a book last year called Tabula Rasa, which is a book of kind of short bits of subjects and pieces that he never wrote. So that's the conceit of it, that he's getting a chance to write now. And they're on all different subjects. Anybody who was familiar with his book called The Patch, it's a little similar. It's similar to that, but The Patch was pieces from he had written. It's snippets. This is now things that hadn't been done before. So he published a volume of that. He's been publishing segments of that in the New Yorker for several years now. He had another one this January, and he's working on a second volume of Tabula Rasa. And he's bringing his imagination to the present day. One of his recent Tabula Rasa items was about Wordle, and he did a great job. So he's not just writing about things from the past.
What was his take on Wordle?
Oh, he enjoys it because he loves words, and he played through. He gave a list of all the beginning words he tries, and he had lots of imaginative ideas about Wordle.
Okay, I have to check that one out. Yeah. Peter Hessler was one of his students, and he is another excellent nonfiction writer who wrote a book about China called Oracle Bones, which I highly recommend. But how did Peter come to write the foreword to your book?
Well, I really wanted to have somebody who knew McPhee, who was kind of steeped in his world and who could, give perspective on him. I really honored that Peter did that. And I think he did a beautiful job in the foreword and kind of telling his story with McPhee, but also telling the story of another generation. This kind of comes back to what we were talking about before, where McPhee has really inspired a whole big group of writers, and Peter Hessler is definitely one of them.
Great. Are there any other aspects of the book or McPhee that you want to explore?
Well, one other bit of detective work I did, which I enjoyed, was I learned early on from him, I had never known this, that he had spent a year in the mid-50s, right after college, as a screenwriter, that he wanted to be a television screenwriter. He had worked on a show called Robert Montgomery Presents, which was one of many really strong live drama shows that populated American TV in the mid-50s. So McPhee wrote some episodes. He studied the craft. He sat for months watching the show being done, and then he wrote some episodes, and two of them were bought and made. And then, of course, it became my quest to see these shows. And archiving of TV in the 1950s was really poor. And so I searched and searched through the internet and other sources, and eventually I found one copy of one of the shows. And the only place on earth that I've been able to find, it's called The Man Who Vanished. And it is held by the UCLA Film and Television Archive in Los Angeles. And you can only go see it in person. So I made a trip to Los Angeles just to see that. And it was just incredible to sit in the room and to watch the genius of McPhee as a 25-year-old. He completely redid this short story, which, by the way, was by a New Yorker writer, because he was always looking at the New Yorker for ideas, and just made it really a brilliant comedy and also psychological drama about this man having a middle-age life crisis. So I definitely recommend people to go to Los Angeles and see his screenplay. The scripts themselves are in the Beinecke Library at Yale, so you can read them. But I don't think reading the script of a screenplay is not quite the same as seeing it done live.
The show that almost vanished.
No, very good.
So, Noel, thank you very much. I really want to recommend that people buy your book, Looking for a Story, published by Princeton University Press by Noel Rubinton. It's been great chatting about it, and wish you all the success with it.
Thanks very much. I really enjoy Now It's History.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.